Hey guys, it's Quinn here, your friendly neighborhood sci-fi guy. If you appreciate my content, you can help out tremendously by clicking the like button so that the YouTube algorithm is willing to circulate my content. Thanks guys. One of the first films ever produced centered around space travel. 1902's A Trip to the Moon was directed by George Mells and can be loosely considered as the first science fiction movie adaptation ever. The short film was inspired by many different works, but much of it was influenced by the work of Jules Verne, mainly his 1865 book, From Earth to the Moon, and the 1870 book, Around the Moon, which was its sequel. The film itself follows a group of scientists, astronomers who travel from planet Earth to the Moon, propelled through space by a cannon attached to a capsule. After exploring the surface of the Moon, they discover the inhabitants of the Moon. The film also takes from various mythological sources. For instance, the insect-like native inhabitants of Earth's moon are called Selenites, after the Greek goddess of the moon, Selene. We could go into depth deconstructing the short and highly influential French film Trip to the Moon, but not in this video. Humankind didn't get to the moon until 1969, of course. And please, Joe Rogan fans, save it. Just save it. But by that time, science fiction greats like Jules Verne, Robert Heinlein, Frank Herbert, and Isaac Asimov, as well as countless others, had already been exploring outer space in their books for years. Asimov created the Galactic Empire as it's known and thought of today, no question about it. His Foundation series is the most influential series of its kind. And though highly controversial, Heinlein's 1959 book Starship Troopers set trends for the depiction of futuristic military forces and much of the science fiction that followed. Arthur C. Clarke's many works also helped tremendously to popularize the idea of space travel in the 1950s and throughout the next several decades. In 1950, Clarke actually wrote a short book called Interplanetary Flight, which outlined the basic concept of space travel to people who weren't necessarily familiar with the idea. Of course, this was based on their current understanding of astronautics at the time, so not exactly accurate today. Arthur C. Clarke in particular made several predictions about subjects related to, but not directly tied to space travel. For example, Clarke predicted the eventual existence of telecommunication satellites. The writers of the last couple of hundred years, especially the 40s, 50s, and 60s, are the ones we remember most when considering the history of space travel and stories. But actually, the idea of mankind traveling through space is much, much older. Ancient, in fact. There are Hindu stories from the Ramayana, which is one of two major Sanskrit epics, depicting flying machines capable of destroying cities with advanced weapons of mass destruction and traveling into space. These date back to the 4th and 5th century, between 300 and 500 AD. Another example of an ancient text depicting space travel that we have to mention is Lucian of Samosata's 2nd century novella, or short novel depending on who you ask, True History. In authentic science fiction fashion, True History uses the setting of a voyage through outer space to make a statement on the use of hyperbole in travel literature. The novella opens by explaining that the story itself is not in fact true, and that everything in it is in fact a lie. I write of matters which I neither saw nor suffered, nor heard by reports from others, which are in no being nor possible ever to have a beginning. This, depending on how you look at it, might beg the question, is that statement itself a lie? But then that would be a paradox and it gets messier from there, but that's not the point. In the novel we encounter alien life forms, worlds which operate by alternative physical laws from our own, and interplanetary warfare. For example, the protagonist of the novel is the author Lucian himself. In the book, he witnesses the battle between the people of the sun and the people of the moon. They fight for the right to claim and colonize the morning star. These were appointed to spin a web in the air between the moon and the morning star, which was done in an instant and made a plain champagne upon which the foot forces were planted. François-Marie Arouet, known mainly by his pen name, Voltaire, wrote Micromegas in 1752. In it, space travel features prominently. It is also notable for suggesting that people of other worlds may in some ways have more advanced technology than what is found on Earth. The novel is named for one of its characters that appears in the first of 7 chapters. Micromegas is an inhabitant of one of the planets orbiting the Sirius star. Micromegas, whose name literally means small large, lives on a world more than 20 million times the size of Earth, and he himself is nearly 40 kilometers tall. At age 450, Micromegas is approaching the end of his childhood. Micromegas eventually travels from world to world in a journey to develop his mind and heart. He quickly spanned the Milky Way, and I am obliged to report that he never saw, throughout the stars it is made up of, the beautiful Empyrean sky that Vicar Durham boasts of having seen at the other end of his telescope. The story describes his method of travel as making use of the forces of repulsion and attraction, which appears to be a clear reference to the work of renowned scientist Sir Isaac Newton. It cannot be overstated the influence that publications such as Amazing Stories and Weird Tales had on the sci-fi genre. These magazines often featured the work of science fiction authors who are now considered greats. In 1928, both magazines featured works which essentially represented the birth of the space opera. Skylark of Space by Edward E. Smith, which I briefly mentioned in my video on Asimov's influence on the sci-fi genre, was published by Amazing Stories, originally in early 1928, and again as a novel in 1946, though later versions differ greatly from the original publication. Skylark of Space depicted one of the earliest depictions of interstellar travel. It worked by combining a newly discovered fictional element, known as Element X, with pure copper, with the final component being a field generated by a particle accelerator. While we were unconscious, Miss Vanneman, we had probably attained a velocity of something like 7,413,000,000 miles per second, and that is the approximate speed at which we are now traveling. We must be nearly 6 quadrillion miles, and that is a space of several hundred light years away from our solar system, or more plainly, about 6 times as far away from our Earth as the North Star is. We couldn't see our sun with a telescope even if we knew which way to look for it. The same year, Weird Tales published Edward Hamilton's Crashing Suns, the first story in what would become Crashing Suns: Interstellar Patrol, assembled from 7 stories in 1965. In a society that has colonized the 8 planets of our solar system. They had gone out to planet after planet, had conquered the strange atmospheres and bacteria and gravitations, until now the races of man held sway over all the sun's 8 wheeling worlds. And it was from this Earth, 1,000 centuries before, that there had ventured out the first discoverers, crude little space boats, whose faulty gravity screens and uncertain controls contrasted strangely with the mighty leviathans that flashed between the planets now. In the story, a nearby star is swiftly veering towards their sun. The destruction of their solar system seems inevitable, and the current technology is not capable of traveling to other stars in an efficient manner. It would take them hundreds of years to reach a new system. It is calculated by our astronomers that in less than a year our sun and this dying star will meet head-on, will crash together in a giant flaming collision, and the result of that collision will be the annihilation of our universe. For the planets of our system will perish like flowers in a furnace in that titanic holocaust of crashing suns. In the story, a team ends up journeying beyond the solar system in a last-ditch effort to save human society. Now, if we were to list every mention of space travel in every story since 300 AD, this video would be hours long. What's important to take away from this, however, is that humans have always dreamed of traversing through the stars, essentially since forever. Humans have the ability to look at the world and see what it is. We reshape it to suit us. We use the resources around us to create new technologies that enrich our lives. As long as there has been a human species, we have been a species of innovators and inventors. As we have conquered our globe, one day, if we're lucky, we shall conquer others. And hopefully we as a species can learn to live in balance with the environments that we explore rather than dominate them. It only requires a small leap of imagination to look at what we have created on this world and see the possibilities of what we could make out there, among the stars.